Thank you everyone for joining us for this little reunion conversation of the SuiteScript Stories. Eric Grubaugh and Tim Dietrich. Tim, thank you for joining me. And let's thank Salto for getting us together and hosting this webinar. We'll be catching up a little bit to get started and just see what we've been up to since the last recording of the podcast. And then we will move into talking about SuiteQL. And Tim is our SuiteQL guru. Be talking about some common questions and problems that he sees. And then we will have some time for your audience question and answers. So use the webinar questions to post any questions you have as we talk. The session will be recorded and it will be available on SuiteHub immediately or shortly thereafter. And then in about a week or so, we'll post the audio to the SuiteScript Stories podcast feed. And I think that's all the introduction I have. Anything you want to add, Tim?
No, just, again, thanks to everyone at Salto for making this possible and
being very persistent with us.
It's always, I know it sounds really cheesy, but it's always an honor to just do this kind of thing with you. I remember when you first asked me about doing the SuiteScript Stories, I'm like, why me? I still look at you as the SuiteScript god. And so thanks for doing it. Thanks for asking me. I don't know how I became the SuiteQL guy, but whatever. If people want to think of me that way, that's fine, but I still have a lot to learn. So
you did the same thing I did. You just kept at it and kept sharing with the public, more importantly.
Yeah, I learned as much from them, I think, as hopefully they learned from me. So yeah.
When was the last recording?
It was April of 2021. So it's been a while.
2 years. 2-year anniversary or reunion, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it feels as though in some ways like it was yesterday that we had the last recording, and then in other ways it just feels like a lifetime ago. So much
different life,
happened.
Yeah. A dream. So. That was a dream, right?
Those are back in times when we could do this a couple times a week, and it was a lot of fun. I do miss it. So.
What have you been doing for 2 years?
A lot, really. A lot of client work. Really just, I think, continuing to try to figure out how I fit into the NetSuite space. I've talked to you about that before. I've really only been doing NetSuite work for 4 or 5 years. But I was, doing programming for years and years before that, a lot of web development work. So it's really just been trying to figure out how to take that experience that I had and how does it apply to NetSuite? Does it? And I think I've found a sweet spot in there. No pun intended with the sweet spot part, but you know what I mean. So yeah, it's been busy. A lot of client work. Nowadays I'm doing a lot of web applications, a lot of web portals, APIs, webhooks of all things. Released a whole bunch of open source stuff. I've got a couple of things coming out in the next couple of months. So yeah, I could talk about that a little bit more if you want, but yeah, I've been busy. How about you? What are you doing? You sort of disappeared there for a while,
I did.
Yeah.
Before I get into that, I just want to touch on, you said, right now you've only been doing NetSuite work for 5 years. And 2 years ago, we were doing a podcast. You were already the SuiteQL guy at that point. So just within 3 years, you sort of carved out a niche and, developed some expertise. So I think that says something promising or exciting about NetSuite and this space, is that if you sort of find something you're super interested in and are passionate about and start sharing, it doesn't take long to establish that expertise and renown. Maybe that sounds arrogant, but but it
Well,
doesn't take long to sort of carve that space out for yourself.
yeah, I think for me, I was in the right place at the right time. I got lucky, really. I started to use SuiteQL when it was in beta, and realized that, well, that was what I was looking for. That was the missing piece for me with NetSuite development. I can finally write a query,
Yeah.
and use it in the app.
And for me, I was like, oh no, I have to write queries.
Yeah, but you're coming around, I think.
I am. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, I agree with you though. I think if you find some part of NetSuite, and there's so much to know, right? When people, if you ever meet somebody who says, "Oh, I know everything about NetSuite," run. There's so much to know. There's so many things that it does, and I think the one thing that we don't have enough of, and you and I have talked about this in the past, is people contributing and sharing. I think we're seeing that a little bit more. More blogs and podcasts and stuff like that. But I think that's what the community needs, right? Especially the development side of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to you. What have you been doing?
That's just my call to action for the 107 of you in the audience, 108. It doesn't take long to find something you're interested in, passionate about, and start sharing.
Yeah.
Me. Yeah, I took, once the podcast wrapped up, I literally disappeared. I took a year off, took a full year off. I didn't do any work at all. I just stayed home with my son and raised him and hung out with him and got some hobbies. And I vanished. I dropped off the internets for a little while, and it was great. But yeah, let's see, at the end of 2021, I joined a company called Compass, a real estate brokerage, a NetSuite end user. So I'm on a team of 4 to 6 NetSuite developers, depending on how you divide our teams up. And that's what I'm doing. I'm writing code, writing Suite script still every day. And we manage huge transaction volumes coming through on this custom platform. And my team is just dedicated to that integration, making sure that transactions for a real estate deal comes in, somebody buys a house somewhere in the United States, and we make sure all the transactions make it in correctly to NetSuite and get updated and all that good stuff. So it's been great.
Well, I think I think I speak for a lot of people when I say when you disappeared, there was a noticeable gap, something missing in the community. I'm glad you're back. I know you're not kind of doing what you were doing before as much, but it's it's the work you're doing with Salto and stuff like that. It's just good to have you back. So welcome back.
I suppose I should mention that too. Yeah, I spent the first part of this year building the SDF course for SuiteHub. That was super fun, and hopefully it's been very helpful to the people who've taken it. I think SuiteHub, helping to launch that, is a really cool platform. I'm really excited about sort of the potential there. I hope we get a ton more contributions and creators building and sharing and creating their knowledge on the platform, which is why I decided to take part.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting thing that Salto's doing, and it's something that, again, another thing the community needs. So yeah, I'm excited about it. Seems like it's been a big success, your first course. So it's awesome.
I would have to let Salto talk about the overall success, but I've been really happy with the people who have come into the Slack for it and ask questions and all that stuff. It has been nice to sort of reintegrate myself into the community and get a little more interaction. I enjoy coaching and collaborating. So that's why it's been great at Compass as well. I worked alone for so long. It's really nice to collaborate with people now and have people like question my decisions and it's good to get some pushback and again, some collaboration and questions. It's awful quiet working alone sometimes.
Yeah, I can relate. Yeah. All right.
Well, anything else we've been doing, or should we get into like the reason people are here?
Yeah, I think we should talk about SuiteQL if you're ready.
I'm ready, but I'm only ready because I'm turning it over to you because you have all the information.
But I don't know about that. So what I did was, I've been getting asked a lot of questions over the past couple of years about SuiteQL, and also just running into things myself. So what I did was I put together what I think are some of the more common questions that I get asked about SuiteQL, and then also just some of the things that people come to me with where they're frustrated and they're like, is this really, a thing? Do you share this frustration? And I'll talk a little bit about that too. So I'll start off with a simple one here. Like one of the most common questions that I get asked, or one of the common mistakes I see, are people making assumptions about table names. Like when they start using SuiteQL, they're expecting that there's going to be, like a table for purchase orders or invoices and stuff like that. And that the names are going to be apparent. And in some cases, they kind of are. But it doesn't take you long to realize that there's three main tables that you're almost always using with SuiteQL. And that's the transaction table, the entity table, and the item table. Mm-hmm. And really everything, I shouldn't say everything, but almost everything that you want is really in those three tables. It's just a matter of figuring out what the record type is that you're looking for in there. So like a good example is, you're going to find sales orders in the transaction table, and there's a type for that. Mm-hmm. You'll find things like customers and vendors and contacts in the entity table. And then of course, all the different types of items end up over in the item table. There are some things that do appear to be tables, things like sales ordered, sales invoiced, customer, vendor.
Oh, fun.
And if you ever get a chance, I would query them. Really what I think they are, if you are familiar with relational databases, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm almost positive that really what they are views. Mm-hmm. So in some way, something like the customer, what appears to be the customer table, is a view on the entity table where it's designed to just show you things that are pertinent to a customer. Like, for example, their open balance and things like that. So those views can be, or tables can be, very helpful. And if you haven't ever checked them out, I would. But I think that, again, sort of assuming that you know the names of the tables, I think for a newcomer to SuiteQL, that's probably one of the first things you're going to run into, is you really do need to know what the real names of the tables are. And I guess, I would say that probably when I'm working with SuiteQL, sometimes the hardest part of that is just trying to figure out where the data that you want, where is it? What table is it in? Which leads me to, I guess, one of the frustrations that people have, which is that we really don't have a great way of accessing the schema of the NetSuite database.
This is where I was going.
Yeah. So and so many people come to me and they're like, is there a real schema somewhere? Is there something, can you point me to? I'm like, well, and then I can also usually tell by this next question, which is, is there a way to query the query SuiteQL for the schema? Like, they're coming at it from, say, Oracle, and they're thinking that we can query a system table to get the list of tables,
fields, or
mm-hmm. Which you would
describe a table.
Right. And we just can't, unfortunately. And when I'm talking about it, I should kind of back up a little bit. I'm talking about SuiteQL from the perspective of somebody who's using it from SuiteScript or SuiteTalk REST. There's Suite Analytics Connect, which is the ODBC option. And I think things are very different there, right? You probably can do some of the things that I'm going to say you can't do. But it's a different flavor of SuiteQL, if you will.
But it's also a different schema, isn't it? Isn't all the ODBC, JDBC stuff a different schema anyway? So even if you can query that schema, that doesn't matter in SuiteScript.
It might give you a clue as to what you're looking for, like in the way that we use SuiteQL, but sometimes that can lead to even more frustration because you do see a table, I think, coming at it from the ODBC side, and then you think, well, I'll just use that in my script or my query, and it's not there. So the best that we have today still is the records catalog. That's the option you can get to when you're in the NetSuite UI and you go to setup and records catalog. Mm-hmm. That's the official, I guess, way to see the schema, sort of, kind of. In the SuiteQL query tool that I developed, there's the tables reference function, which really uses the same API that the records catalog uses. It just presents the same data in a different way. So that's an option for you, and some people prefer that. I mentioned that when in the intro that I'm working on a lot of open source stuff, and one of the projects I'm working on is, I've been calling it the SuiteQL schema tool, which I wrote about a while ago. I'm really close to having it done. And basically what that is going to be is an actual runtime application. You run it on your local machine and log into NetSuite, and then it'll kind of extract what it needs to kind of give you, I hope, an even easier way to query the schema. So that's in the works. I'm hoping to get that out in June. So, but don't hold me to it.
Nice.
So before I continue, do you have any questions?
I do. I have questions. I have comments. Your SuiteQL tool, I use it with every single query that I ever have to write. It's great for rapid iteration, developing a query. So great job. Thank you.
Thanks
for making my job easier. And I'm sure a lot of other developers as well. The schema problem is easily my biggest frustration with it. It's like the records catalog is great that it's there, and there's a ton of information in there, but it's not very searchable or discoverable. It's like nothing is. I don't know. I am not a query person. I am not an SQL person. Not a DBA by any stretch of the imagination. And so I can't just read a bunch of tables, listed in a document and get the sense of the schema. That's not how my brain works. So it's really frustrating that that's the only option we have. And I feel like I have to relearn every single time. Every single time I go to write even the simplest query, I have to relearn. I have to look everything up. It's very frustrating.
I think it's probably slow. Yeah, it is. I think it's probably the single biggest obstacle for adoption of SuiteQL. I really do. And I think it's especially true for developers who don't have any SQL experience whatsoever. It's a big challenge. I'm really hoping that the tool that I'm working on will make it easier. There's a video of it on my site on one of the blogs. And I show how you can actually put in a keyword and it'll search across the table names and the field names and so on, whether it's the actual name or the description of it. And so it kind of gives you a fighting chance of finding some of those tables, that you're struggling to find. So there's that. So we'll see. I hope it helps. But I would love for Oracle NetSuite to put something official out that I would love to have them do something where the SuiteQL query tool itself just became unnecessary, And I'm saying that like I'm the guy who wrote the thing, but it would be great to have some like official thing that was, whatever, but you can dream.
Absolutely.
So that's a very similar thing that I see a challenge with the schema is that, of course, with different NetSuite instances, the schema changes, right? So I think like for someone like yourself, where you're working for a NetSuite customer, schema is probably pretty stable, right? Like you're not adding tons of tables all the time, I think. You're going to get familiar with the schema that you're working with, of the instance you're working with. But if you're a developer or a consultant, like I, see so many variations on the NetSuite instances themselves, like what features have been enabled, what customizations have been made, and that changes the schema. So, it's tricky for me, like when I'm writing a query and I blog about it, especially that, knowing that query that I've shared, there's a pretty good chance it won't work in your instance, right? Because of things that you've done, things I've, whatever. But that does make it, even more challenging. So a good example is there's a column on the account table that shows the balance of the GL account, and it's awesome when it's there. But if you turn on something like multi-currency, if you have that enabled, then a field like that, it's there, but it'll, SuiteQL will start giving you strange errors that lead you to believe, well, it's there, but you can't see it because it's not applicable. So, that's just another obstacle, but there's really no way, I think, to get around that one. Just have to work through those challenges. So,
right.
But I think, again, the schema visibility is kind of how I refer to it. I think that's the biggest challenge that we face.
It's definitely, it's mine. Every time I have to go write a query, I get nervous. I get frustrated because, and to be fair, like it was the same when I first started writing save searches. Mm-hmm. It was the same. I had the same struggles then. So it's not just SuiteQL's fault.
Well, that's a good segue to another question. I'm going to go out of the order that I had. I didn't really have these in any particular order, but I was going to talk about that, which is
great.
One of the questions I get is, when it comes to SuiteQL queries versus saved searches, which one is faster? What should I be using? And
I have that question in here.
I'm sure. And I think I'll I don't think there's any official answer on this, although I've heard rumors that, that NetSuite has said different things about that, answered it in their own way. But my own experience has been that the queries are faster. And, when you think about what a saved search is, at some point, it has to boil down to a query anyway, right? I mean, it's a relational database under the hood. At some point, your crazy saved search, has got to be converted to a select statement anyway. So you're basically skipping that sort of, abstraction layer.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly. I think there's that. And just even, I think beyond that, I think you just get the data back in a more succinct way. And also, I know that, for someone like yourself who, you're not as comfortable with queries yet as you are with saved searches. I think over time, you get to a point where you realize that your code, if you're working these queries into SuiteScript versus, putting a dynamic saved search in there, that the code you're writing is more succinct too and easier to manage. So,
yes,
there's that.
Yeah,
that I was gonna say that also leads to like the other very common question I get, which is, I have this saved search. Can I convert it easily to a query? Is there some magic button that I don't see? As far as I know, there's no easy way to do that. So you got to convert it yourself, try to figure out what the query would look like.
Yeah, for me, I think writing searches is easier only because I have so much retained knowledge about the schema. Yeah. So while it's quicker for me to sort of write the search, all the code around the search, the setup, and then like actually doing something with the results is way cleaner, more concise with SuiteQL by far.
Yeah.
And simple queries, at least, if we're not doing a bunch of joins or crazy, inner tables or anything like that, then it's really simple. The as mapped results function is the best thing in any of SuiteScript's APIs. The fact that it takes the query result and turns it into a plain old JavaScript object that I can process without going through the result object abstraction is fantastic. That method alone is worth most changing most searches to a query. There's always so much code around translating a search results object into the data format I actually want it in. There's always a normalization step. Every time I run a search or a query, it doesn't matter. I'm always normalizing it somehow into whatever a logic I want to do with it. So as mapped results, best function in SuiteScript. You can at me.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. So it's really then for you just getting more familiar with query, how to build select statements, how to do the joins, identifying the tables, right? That's your obstacle. That's
the obstacle, and the tool, your query tool helps a lot with that, because I can rapidly sort of develop those. I can rapidly iterate. I don't have to change my code, publish my code, rerun a script. I can just pop in there, make sure the query works, and then translate that into my code.
So, a good tip there too, and in coaching people and having sessions, I think people think that you can only ever have one instance of the query tool open, right? But you can pop that open in multiple tabs and be working on different things. So like if you're in the middle of a crazy query and then you're like, I think this is a table I want, you can pop open another tab, and no harm, no foul there. So
I have done that to build when we have like nested queries. I sort of pull each part out into its own tab, and then I have a tab that's progressively building them up to make sure, okay, which stage is the problem in?
Yeah, exactly. Commenting things out is another good way to deal with that. So all right. So
real quick, we've got some, before you continue, we've got some questions coming in. I'm seeing them. The session is being recorded, and it will be available shortly after this on SuiteHub, and in a week or so published to the SuiteScript Stories podcast feed. But I'm seeing the questions, and we'll sort of reserve some space at the end for getting these answered. All right, back to you, Tim.
So one of the other questions I get asked a lot, and I think it's kind of this is a tricky one. It has to do with, I think there's some perceived limitations of SuiteQL in terms of like how many records you can get back, right? And there's a lot of confusion around that. A lot of, I see a lot of questions on the different forums. I get asked about it a lot. I've written about it a lot. And there's a blog post we'll either put it in the show notes, or I think we're going to do a blog post to kind of follow up with this with links and stuff. But I've written about how to get beyond the limitations of like, getting the first, say, 5,000 records. I get a lot of requests from developers who are trying to figure out how to basically export everything out of NetSuite and put it into, say, a data warehouse or something like that. And so they're trying to move large amounts of data. I don't know that using SuiteQL in the way that I normally use it, whether I'm running it through, say, SuiteTalk or through a RESTlet, I don't think that's going to be your best bet. I think you're probably going to have to bite the bullet and use the ODBC option for something like that. But there are ways of writing queries where you can sort of paginate through, getting up to 5,000 records at a time, depending on what you're doing. It's just, you have to do the work, right? You have to step through those 5,000 records, and but you can get, like very large tables. You can pull all the, all the records down if you really want to. So, but that's a big one. And very common. So
probably the most common saved search question too. How do I get more than 1,000 or more than 4,000? So
you have to be kind of creative about it.
How do I get 1,000,000 rows?
Wait
a few hours.
Right. I mean, I realize it's frustrating. Like paginating is nobody wants to do that. But there's good arguments for doing it that way anyway, right? It's like, why wait until you're trying to pull 1 million records down and you're at 999,999, and then all of a sudden you're out of memory or something. You waited all that time for
instruction
nothing.
count limit exceeded.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and also just in terms of governance and things like that, like you'll figure it out. But yeah, there are ways to get beyond some of those limits. So don't let that stop you. But at the same time, my advice would be, if you're trying to just basically suck all the data out of NetSuite and put it somewhere else, I don't think this is going to be for you. So there's other better strategies.
There's no script type other than a MapReduce that can handle that much data anyway. It'll run out of governance way before you get through that many records.
Yeah. And I think that
MapReduce is still going to take forever. And then you have to stream all the concurrent result threads back together and make sure you don't have any duplicates or conflicts.
Right. I think that if you're approaching this kind of problem where you're just trying to pull, every column, every record out of every table, maybe you should be approaching that from a whole other perspective. Like, take the time to figure out what you really need, what tables are really important, what fields / columns are important to you. You probably don't really need all that data. Mm-hmm. I think I saw so many requests come after I referred to it as the NetSuite Valentine's Day massacre that we had this year, where the data center was out, right? And people were like, I don't want this to ever happen to me again. I want a local backup. There are solutions out there that you can, I've never used them, but you can check them out to do that kind of thing. But I think that's where a lot of the demand for this came from, is just this fear of not having the data local. And I've talked to clients about that too, and said, even if you had it locally, what would you do with it? Just, I guess you feel better knowing you have it, but it's not like you can get your business back up and running quickly. You'd have to, I don't even know what you'd do. So anyway, so that's something I get asked about a lot. So, should I go on to the next thing? Are there any questions you want me to answer before I go on?
I think no, it's been maybe 5 more minutes or so. Right. 5 to 10 more minutes if you've got topics to fill the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let's do that. And then around a quarter, 45, we'll transition to the questions from the audience.
All right. So the next thing I was going to talk about are what I refer to as the SuiteQL blind spots, which I kind of see them as 2 types, really. One is that there are just certain tables that we don't have access to at all through SuiteQL, and that can be very disappointing. I'll give you an example. If you're looking at a customer payment and you're trying to figure out what it was applied to, that can be very challenging. Same for vendors. The files that are attached to transactions, that can be difficult to get to, if not impossible, through SuiteQL. So there's just certain tables that are in there that we just don't have yet. I don't know that I'd call them defects, but they feel like that to me at times. You just would think that you'd have access to everything, but we still don't. So there's that type of blind spot where we just don't have the table. And then the other one is that there are certain types of fields that we can't query. And that's, I don't know, like weird, but it's a thing. An example is like long text, calculated, unstored fields, images, binary data. We just can't query those. And you'll know when you've hit that error, because it'll tell you that it's a unsupported data type. So, that's a thing. So keep that in mind.
But there's no like, once again, there's no like Bible. There's no direction. There's no documentation on like, hey, here's the roadmap. Here's what's missing from SuiteQL. We don't have any of that sort of information to find. You just have to find it by needing it and then it not being there.
Right. And then you have to come up with creative ways to get it, in other
Then you have to get
ways.
super creative.
Yeah, so there's that. So another question I get asked a lot, and frustration that people run into, is there are fields that when you're looking at them in the UI, they appear to be at, like, say, on the transaction at the header level. Things like subsidiary, location, department, created from is another one. And so you query, say, the transaction table, you're looking for that field and it's not there. Well, it turns out a lot of those fields are down on the transaction line level. And so if you join to the main line item, that's how you can get to them. So,
yep. That is a query I had to write very recently. All I need is the subsidiary for this transaction, and I need to write 2 joins to get it. Like, oh no. Oh no.
Yeah. So that's
frustration number 2.
Yeah.
With SuiteQL for me is how deep some of the ostensibly surface level values are. And I'm not like criticizing the schema or anything, because I don't envy them their task of designing this data structure, this data set. But man, some really common values are really hard to get to.
Well, I think
hard.
Yeah. I think when eventually you begin to realize that when you're looking for something that is there, and again, it looks like in the UI, it should be on the header and it's not. Just, it takes a couple of times and you're like, oh, that's one that's on the line item level, right? So then people ask me, well, why do they do that? And I think the reason for it is that there are some configurations, some options that actually need those values down at the line item level, right? So, a transaction that involves multiple subsidiaries is a good example, right? Like, it's not going to be one subsidiary up on the transaction header level. It depends on what line you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Same for department, that sort of thing. But the created from is a very common question that I get. Like, why can't I get that? So, like, an example would be like, you're looking at an invoice and you want to know what sales order it was generated off of.
Right.
So you're looking for that created from, because you see it there in the UI, right? So that's how you can get to it. Yeah.
It's right there. Just hand it to me, please.
Right. And it's not that bad. It's one really easy join to the transaction line table, and then you've got it. So be it. It doesn't really slow things down or anything. So I've written about that a little bit, and I've also written about the next transaction and previous transaction lines tables, which is another way to get related transactions. A little bit more complicated, but that's another approach that you can take to kind of figure out, like again, like, suppose you're looking at an invoice and you're trying to figure out on an invoice line, well, what line did that come from off of the sales order? That's the kind of thing you can use those tables for. So that's a biggie. Let's see. Permissions, another biggie. So I get asked about this one a lot. Yeah. Not so much for people that are trying to use SuiteQL to write scripts that are running inside of NetSuite itself. Usually you've got that figured out just by the user and what role they're running or logged in as. But when it comes to integrations and trying to figure out what role to use and what permissions the role should have in order to run those queries, whether you're running it across SuiteTalk or whatever, that's another challenge. Yeah, I have a blog post for that as well, and it has a nice searchable table that you can use to, like, basically query for a table, and it'll tell you, hopefully, what role or what permission you need to query that table. So that's a biggie.
Yeah. Always fun to sort out those issues too.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating. So let's see. Yeah, I think I have a whole bunch of other stuff, but I think it's probably a good spot to stop. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we can transition over to some questions real quick. I'm just gonna scan through mostly in the order I see them, prioritizing SuiteQL specific stuff. Again, this is being recorded. If you have your questions, dump them into the Q&A here. And the recording will be available on SuiteHub shortly after this, and in about a week or so on the SuiteScript Stories podcast feed. All right. First one here is from Anonymous. What are some hidden or otherwise not well-known SuiteQL features? An example, built-in .df, or so the display format, the criteria format, those built-in features. What are some hidden or not well-known SuiteQL features?
I don't know that I
Thank
have
you,
any,
Anonymous.
I don't know that I have any features that are hidden that I know about, but there are tables that are buried down in there. And when you pull up something like the record catalog, or you're using the tables function in the tool, there are certain tables that are so deep that they're almost impossible to get to. They're not listed in the initial list of tables. They are sort of like orphaned. They're there, but they're not, like, there's no foreign keys that make it easy for us to locate them. So I get asked about that a lot, and sometimes I can find the table that you're looking for. I've got some techniques for doing that I won't talk about here because they're just goofy. Basically, it comes down to guessing, looking at the UI, looking at the XML representation of a record, trying to figure out what the table name might be. Sometimes you get lucky. So again, I wouldn't really say that's a hidden feature, but there are tables buried in there that do exist that you can query that you'll never find in the catalog. And that's one of my goals with that other tool, is to make it so that they surface, you know.
While you're building that, you can record yourself like going through one of those sessions, trying to uncover it, say, this is why we need this.
Yeah.
Here's a really painful video of how
I have an
we
example.
have to go about this.
Yeah, I have there, and I don't have it in front of me, but there's one table in particular. I know it exists in accounts that have Suite Commerce Advanced enabled. And so I know the table, but I can't surface it. I can't programmatically find it. So I've got some ideas. That's one of the reasons why I've been sort of paused on the tool, is I have some ideas on how I can check your account when you're building the index of your schema in your instance. Like, these are some other common tables that might be there. Let's see. Right. So,
yeah. I think I have, I don't know if these are not well known. I think I have a couple of tips though. The best one for me that's maybe not well documented is, like I said, as mapped results, best function in SuiteScript. But when you build your query, so what that function does, if anyone hasn't used it, it takes all your query results and turns them into plain JavaScript objects, key value pairs. And whatever alias you give a column in the query will end up being the key for that property in the resulting object. So you can say, select, I don't know, created date as date created, or whatever, if you want to flip it around or for whatever reason. Or you can give every column its own alias in the query. That not only helps you sort of concisely reference that column in the query, but also afterwards, once it goes through as mapped results, that ends up being the key for the object. And that's super helpful for making it really easy to iterate over and process your query results. So I use that. Every query I write uses column aliases and as mapped results without fail. That's a good one. All of those built-in functions that questioner mentioned are documented. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but there is actually a help page for those built-in functions.
Yeah, that actually brings up another question I get asked a lot, which is, should I use built-in.df or not? And if you're not familiar with that function, what it basically does is it lets you wrap the ID of another related table. Like, for example, if you're querying like a sales order and you use built-in.df on, say, the entity, the customer ID, it'll let you pull across the name of that record without having to join to it and get the name. So it can be convenient, right? It makes your code more succinct. So people ask me, should I be using that or not? And I use it a lot when I'm sharing queries on the blog because I like for the queries to be as succinct as possible. But I think you do take a performance hit because if you think about what it's really doing, one way or another, it has to do the join under the hood, right, to get to that value. And I won't go into the details of why that's less efficient using it in the select, like when you're listing the columns that you want back, but you will take a bit of a hit. So keep that in mind, if you, and that's another sort of like, I don't know how to describe it other than this sort of, I get requests a lot for how, can you help me optimize my query? And it's very hard to do because we don't have visibility into the indexes, things like that. We can guess what they are, but there are some things like that you can do, like let's remove some of the built-ins, and sometimes it helps. So
yeah. You just trial and error is our only like performance tool. We just have to try different approaches and see what runs faster. And
that's why I said at the beginning that like I get called the SuiteQL guy or whatever. I feel like I still have so much to learn. There's a lot I don't know. I just trying to figure it out myself. Techniques that work in one situation don't work in another. So it's not a science, unfortunately.
It is not. All right. Our next question is from Nick Williams. I recognize that name. Thanks, Nick. Do you feel SuiteQL is going to replace searches for developers?
Well, I'll answer it and I'll have you answer it too. But I say, I think it is going to at some point. Probably very much like, we're seeing SuiteScript 2, hopefully, SuiteScript 1 is going away, right? Over time, you see the evolution of whatever. But I say that I think it's going to go away just simply because I see so many, developers reach out to me and say that we're trying to do away with our saved searches. So can you help us convert them to queries? So, but what's your take? You're the you're the SuiteScript guy. So what are you seeing?
Do I think they'll actually go away? No, we still have SuiteScript 1. And that hasn't gone away, and it can't go away because the outcry would be tremendous. And the same, like it won't officially go away. Right. No one's going to take away the search module or, the search functions or API or any of that.
I think
I'd see the same thing.
I think the economy would just come to cross. There's a lot of so when I say I think it's going to go away, I don't mean that they're going to yank support for the module, but I think just people are naturally going to stop using it. So.
Could they eventually deprecate it? Sure. I imagine it's a maintenance nightmare trying to manage the ODBC schema, the saved search schema, the SuiteQL schema. I imagine that's terrible for Oracle NetSuite. I imagine that takes a lot of resources. And it doesn't help us either to have all these different schemas to try and weed through. So will it go away? No, not officially. I don't see that ever happening. But could they deprecate it and say we're not adding any new features? All new columns or whatever will be SuiteQL. Sure, they've done that with 1.0 at least. So they may do that. Wild speculation. I don't have any information that would actually happen, but I think I see the same trends that developers are converting from searches to queries. And so maybe it'll sort of just be a natural evolution of the space, because most developers are familiar with SQL. They are not familiar with saved search criteria and results. And so someone brand new coming in who has development experience, probably learned SQL at some point, they're going to gravitate towards that rather than learning the saved search abstraction of a query. So I don't think it will ever officially go away. I do think I see more questions about SuiteQL, so probably more people are writing it, but that's what we see is a very small subset of the actual space. So
I agree.
So I hope that non-definitive answer was informative and helpful.
I think just the general advice is if you're writing new code and you have the time to do it with SuiteQL, do that. That's probably your safe bet, right? Don't write new code. It's like you wouldn't write a new script today with SuiteScript 1. I mean, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Right. Another question here from Anonymous. Any alternative to search.lookup in the query module? Do you want to take that one or should I?
I'll let you take that one. I don't know.
No. Short answer is no. There's no alternative. We, for instance, wrote a utility function to do that same thing. Give it a record type, a record ID, and a list of column names, and it will do its best to pull that. But the problem is, like we're saying, with not everything that shows up on, say, the body of a record is actually on the body of that, is actually in that records table. And so there's no way to know really that any column you give it will be on the body of that record. So the short answer is no. It's a fairly simple utility function to write, put it in a module that you can reuse elsewhere, but the failure rate might be high if you are sort of not arbitrarily, but hoping to get everything off the body. It's not there. Anything to add?
I don't. I'm going to let you run with that one. So, yeah. It's funny, I mentioned that, over the past few years, I feel like I finally found a comfortable spot in NetSuite in terms of the development that I do. And I think the irony is that, and you're probably going to laugh at this, but I really don't do a lot of SuiteScript. Which, because almost everything I'm doing is an integration. If it's an external system, usually I'm leaning on Suite API, which is one of the open source things I put out last year. It's kind of a alternative to SuiteTalk REST, kind of. But I'm not in the innards of NetSuite all the time. That said, I do develop applications that run inside of it, but they're interesting. You can kind of get a sense of the kind of work I do by looking at the tool itself and looking at the source. And SuiteFrame is something else I put out. It kind of gives you a sense of the way I'm working, but I don't know, I'm probably the weirdest NetSuite developer you'd ever meet. If you looked at my Suite script, Eric, I think you'd cry. So I don't want you to ever do that. Don't look at my script. Just run the tool, use it, but don't look at it. If you have, don't tell me. I'll be embarrassed. Anyway.
I won't tell you then. Certainly not live on camera.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks.
All right. I think we have time for one more question here, then we'll do a little wrap up. Okay. And that'll be it. This is from Thomas Dang. Thank you, Thomas. Is there an easy way for SuiteQL to support dynamic filters? In a saved search, I can build logic that conditionally pushes conditions onto an array. Is there a way to do that in SuiteQL?
It depends on how complicated you want that to be. There are some, obviously we have support for parameters. So if you're doing this through a script, if you're running the query through a script, there might be some ways to kind of take advantage of those. There are times where I will dynamically build a query to kind of do what you're asking there, where parameters just not going to cut it. It's more complicated than that. So what you might see in my code, and again, Eric, you probably cringe, but there's sort of a base query. From seeing Tim's code. There's sort of a base query with maybe some, some tokens in there that get replaced or changed depending on the filters that are being applied. I know that's kind of a vague and weird answer, but there are ways to do it, but they're just, there's no nothing that I know of in the query module itself to kind of support that. The closest thing I think we can get to is just parameters. So, but you can dynamically build the query. So,
yeah. So my answer to be yes, you can definitely do this. The query module has the same API that the search module has. It has all the like add condition, add join, add, it has all those functions, and you can conditionally call those however you want to. It is an extremely verbose API, and it takes up a huge amount of space.
Yeah.
We don't do that, but we always write the raw SuiteQL query, and that query is just a string. You can conditionally build that string however you want to. So you can pass in different values, and if certain values are there, you can dynamically add or remove a select, a column from the select, or a condition from your where, or a join. At the end, the input to run SuiteQL is a string, and you can build that string that string can go through as many steps as you want before it gets to run SuiteQL. There's no reason you have to put the whole string right there in the call to run SuiteQL.
Yeah, it's funny,
So we do this. Yeah, we do this all the time in our code. We have tons of places where if this value is present, we need this column, this join, and this where statement. But if it's not there, don't put that in the string.
It's, I said, don't look at the source of the SuiteQL query tool, but if you do look at it, you'll see that I am actually doing what we just described to some extent, where I'm taking the query that you've put into the UI and I'm wrapping it so that I can paginate through it, through the results. So that there is an example in there for you. Probably not ideal, but take a look. Just don't tell me if you look at it.
Yeah. When I published this SuiteScript teardown of the SuiteQL query tool, you don't want to see that video?
I would love to see it, but I'm probably not going to admit that I ever did. But it would, right. Yeah, I could take the rubbing. Sure, go ahead. That would actually be a really interesting session, but I would join anonymously. So
we'd have to reciprocate. We'd have to reciprocate, and you would have to do that for my code as well.
For a query, maybe, but that's it. Yeah, I'm not gonna. Nope. No, you're the SuiteScript god.
Nope.
All right, so the deal's off.
Yeah, we are at our time here. So once again, thank you, Tim, for joining me for our little reunion conversation. It's been great. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining and for asking questions. I know there's a ton of questions I didn't get to. There's still 21 open questions, and I apologize for that. Maybe we have to do this again.
Maybe, yeah.
We'll talk to Salto about that. Thank you, Salto, for hosting and being persistent with us, getting us together. And I have a message here. The recording will be posted on SuiteHub, and in a week or so on the SuiteScript Stories podcast feed. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Catch you all later.
See you.